I was standing at the end of the aisle at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Boston, tuxedo pressed, boutonniere pinned, 200 guests seated and silent. Ryan leaned in and whispered, 5 minutes, bro, you ready? I told him I was. That was the last honest answer I gave anyone that morning. Then I saw Sophie. She was Victoria's bridesmaid, one of 3. I had met her maybe a dozen times over the years, always smiling, easy to talk to. That morning she came out of the bridal suite hallway almost at a run, face white, hands shaking. She grabbed my arm, pulled me behind a pillar, pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. She looked up and said, she didn't know I was still in the room. I am so sorry, Alexander. Are you sure you want to continue? I unfolded the paper. It was a screenshot. A text from Victoria's number at 9:47 that morning, 43 minutes before the ceremony. Recipient Danny. The message read, after today, his account is ours. 3 years, Danny. Finally. 6 words. That was all it took to collapse 3 years. I stood there while the organ warmed up 30 feet away. I am a financial analyst. 12 years finding lies buried in balance sheets. I had sat across from people who told me everything was fine while their numbers said otherwise. I missed it. 3 full years. Not because signs were absent, because I had decided I was exempt, that the life I built was solid, that I had done due diligence on the one thing that mattered. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. My name is Alexander. I am 34, senior financial analyst at Fidelity Investments in Boston. I do not post things like this, but I need to write this somewhere, because right now the inside of my head is not a place I want to be alone. 3 years ago, I walked into the Harvard Club on Commonwealth Avenue for a charity gala black tie, open bar, everyone performing a version of themselves. My firm bought a table. I planned to stay 45 minutes and leave. Then I met Victoria. She was the event planner, clipboard and earpiece, the most composed person in a room full of overperforming guests. I watched her redirect a catering mistake, manage a complaint, and fix a seating conflict in 8 minutes without raising her voice once. I introduced myself at the bar. She said she hated these events. I said I had been there 30 minutes and already agreed. She laughed. A real laugh. We talked for 2 hours. I missed every hand I was supposed to shake. We dated for 2.5 years, sharp, low-key, genuinely funny without performing it, never pushed toward anything showy. 8 months ago, I proposed at Cape Cod. Just the 2 of us on the beach, she cried. I thought it was real. 4 months ago, I opened a joint savings account and moved $340,000 into it. Everything outside retirement for the house we would buy after the wedding. She kissed my cheek and said she couldn't believe how lucky she was. I believed her. Back to Sophie. Back to the pillar. She had been behind the dressing screen in the bridal suite, fixing a hem, when Victoria's phone rang on speaker. Sophie assumed Victoria knew she was still there. She did not. Sophie heard Victoria say, "The account's joint now. Once we are legally married, I will handle the transfer. Don't call me again until after the honeymoon." Sophie had recorded it. She also had the screenshot because Victoria left her phone unlocked and face up on the vanity. Thread visible when Sophie walked past. Sophie said, "I have been standing here 15 minutes trying to figure out if I was imagining things." I told her she wasn't. I checked my watch. 10:02. Ceremony at 10:40. I need 10 minutes and your phone. She nodded. I called Chase Bank from behind that pillar in my tuxedo, 4 feet from my own wedding. Emergency freeze on the joint account. Funds at risk of unauthorized transfer. Every verification question answered in under 90 seconds. Account frozen at 10:04. I handed Sophie her phone and texted Ryan 2 words. Plan B. We had joked about it once over beers. He said, "If something goes sideways at the altar, what do we do?" I said, "I would figure it out." He said, "That is the most analyst answer I have ever heard." We laughed. Ryan wasn't laughing now. He texted back, "Understood." I walked back into the foyer, shook hands with Victoria's uncles, hugged my mother in the front row who was already holding back happy tears. She grabbed both my hands and said, "Victoria is the luckiest woman in this city." I smiled and said I agreed. The organ began. The doors opened. Victoria appeared at the far end of the aisle in an $8,000 gown. her father beside her, smile practiced and radiant and flawless. For 4 seconds I genuinely questioned myself. Maybe I had misread. Maybe Sophie had misheard. Then I remembered the last word. Finally. 3 years. Finally. I knew what I had to do. I knew exactly how. And when it was over, nothing inside that church was ever going to look the same. Update 1. She reached me and took my hand. Fingers warm, grip steady. She smiled the way she had smiled at me 100 times before. And for a moment the organ and the 200 people behind us made everything feel completely normal. I smiled back. The efficient Pastor Greg Whitfield of St. Paul's welcomed everyone and began the opening words. I had rehearsed this moment a dozen times over the past week. I imagined being nervous. I imagined tearing up when she came through those doors. I had not imagined this. Standing at an altar in a church I had rented for $30,000, holding the hand of a woman who had texted Danny at 9:47 that morning to say the account was finally theirs. I was very calm. That surprised me. I expected to shake. I didn't. Pastor Whitfield moved through the ceremony with practiced warmth. The readings. A brief sermon on partnership and trust. I listened to every word about trust and kept my face completely still. Then he reached the traditional question. If anyone present knows any reason why this couple shouldn't be joined in matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace. I raised my hand. The murmur that went through that church was unlike anything I have heard. 200 people registering confusion at the exact same moment makes a very specific sound. Not loud, just dense. Victoria turned to look at me. The smile held for about 2 seconds, kept in place by muscle memory. Then it dropped. Alexander. I do, I said. I am the groom. And I have something everyone here deserves to know. I had told Ryan what Plan B required. He used the time well. While I was in the foyer shaking hands, he quietly connected his laptop to the decorative screen on the left wall of the sanctuary, the one cycling a slideshow of Victoria and me for the past 40 minutes. He loaded one image onto it. That image filled the screen, large enough to read from any seat in the building. The screenshot, Victoria's text to Danny, sent at 9:47 a.m., her name, her number, the timestamp, and the message itself. After today, his account is ours. 3 years. Danny. Finally, the murmur became something else entirely. I reached into my jacket, took out my phone, and pressed play on the audio Sophie had sent me. I held it up so the speaker faced the room. Victoria's voice filled the church. The acoustics at St. Paul's are excellent. Every person in that room heard her say, "The account's joint now. Once we are legally married, I will handle the transfer. Don't call me again until after the honeymoon." 11 seconds. That was the entire recording. In the silence after, I heard someone in the back rows start to cry. Victoria stepped backward. Her heel caught the altar carpet, and she stumbled, grabbing the floral arrangement to steady herself. Her bouquet fell to the floor. She didn't pick it up. In the middle pews, a man stood up. Medium height, dark jacket. Someone I had never seen at any engagement party or rehearsal dinner across 3 years with Victoria. He moved toward the side exit. Ryan was already in the aisle. "I think you should sit back down," Ryan said. He walked to Victoria. She was standing completely still. That was new. Victoria, under pressure, moved fast, organized, redirected. Standing still wasn't something she did. I took her left hand. I slid the engagement ring off her finger. She let me. I placed it in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "You can keep the ring, but the account has been frozen since 10:04 this morning." She looked at me for a long moment. Her mouth opened once, then closed. Maybe she had an answer ready for every scenario except the one where I already knew. I turned to the guests. My mother was in the front row with both hands over her mouth. I held her gaze for a moment, then looked at the room. "I am sorry to have wasted your Saturday. Breakfast is on me. The venue is paid for. Please stay and eat." I walked down the aisle and out through the front doors of St. Paul's Episcopal Church, alone in my tuxedo, on what was supposed to be my wedding day. Ryan caught up on the front steps. He put his hand on my shoulder and said nothing. That was the right call. There was nothing to say. He drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched Boston pass by. The city looked exactly the same as it always does. That seemed strange to me. When something that large collapses on the inside, You expect the outside to register it somehow. It doesn't. I don't regret what I did in that church, not the screen, the recording, or the ring. Victoria made her choice over 3 years, deliberately, with help. The only moment that belonged to her was the moment she was caught. What I found out in the days that followed wasn't just that Victoria had been lying to me. The lie had a co-author, a timeline, and a prior victim. Daniel Hartwell wasn't just the man she had been texting, and this wasn't the first time Victoria had done this. Update 2 Ryan Drive opted me off at my apartment around 2 p.m. I changed out of the tuxedo, hung it in the closet, and sat down at my desk. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't call anyone. I opened my laptop. Here is the thing about 12 years as a financial analyst. When something does not add up, you don't walk away. You pull the source data, you go back to the beginning. You find the moment the numbers stop telling the truth. I had 3 years of data. I was going to find that moment. I started with the basics: email threads, shared calendar entries, bank statements, withdrawals that didn't match conversations I remembered, calendar gaps during times I thought we were together, anything that didn't fit the story I had been living inside. What I found in the first 2 hours wasn't dramatic. Small transfers out of the joint account, never more than $400 at a time, to a payment app I didn't recognize. Over 4 months they added up to just under $6,000. She had been moving money out since the day I deposited it, never fast enough to trigger an alert. Just steady. That was when I looked at my phone. I audit the apps on my devices every few months, a habit I built after a data breach at work years ago. I know what belongs on my phone, so when I found an app called WeatherKnow in a utilities folder I hadn't opened in months, I knew immediately I hadn't installed it. I ran a diagnostic. WeatherKnow was not pulling weather data. It was running in the background, collecting login keystrokes and transmitting them to an external server. It had access to my banking apps. It had been installed 8 months ago, 2 weeks before I proposed at Cape Cod. She had put it on my phone before I had even bought the ring. I met Sophie for coffee the following Tuesday at a cafe in Cambridge. She had more than I expected. Sophie had been Victoria's bridesmaid for about 18 months. Around 6 weeks before the wedding, she started feeling something was off. Victoria had become increasingly focused on the legal timeline, the marriage license, the filing date. When it would be officially recorded, Sophie thought it was just nerves. She kept saying, once everything is official, things will settle down. Once it is done, we can move forward. I thought she meant wedding stress, but looking back, she meant something else entirely. Then Sophie told me the part that changed everything. Victoria and Daniel Hartwell had known each other before she ever met me. They had worked together for at least 2 years before the Harvard Club Gala. Sophie had met Daniel once, briefly, about a year into Victoria's time with me. Victoria introduced him as an old friend from a previous job. Sophie only connected his name to the man in the pew that morning after the audio played. When I heard the recording, Sophie said, I recognized how she talked to him, not like a friend, like a partner, like they had been running something together for a very long time. The Harvard Club Gala was not a coincidence. My attorney confirmed through public records that Daniel Hartwell had been a listed consultant for the event company contracted to run the gala. He was involved in staffing that event. Victoria was placed there. My attorney also found something else in the document review. 6 months before the wedding, Victoria applied for a line of credit in my name, $85,000. She used a copy of my driver's license and a forged signature. The funds were moved into an account I had never seen. My attorney called this identity fraud and criminal forgery under federal law. I filed a report with the FBI Boston field office on a Thursday morning. My attorney came with me. I brought the audio, the screenshots, the phone diagnostic, the forged application, and 3 months of transfer records. The agent assigned was Special Agent Denise Calloway. She listened to everything without interrupting. Then she asked me to wait in the hallway. She came back 20 minutes later with a second agent. Mr. Alexander, she said, Daniel Hartwell is a known subject. We have an open file on him. I asked how old the file was. 4 years old, an investigation out of Seattle, Washington. A man had lost $280,000 through a nearly identical scheme. A woman entered a relationship, opened joint accounts, applied for credit in his name without consent, and disappeared after the transfer. The suspect at the time was identified as a woman named Rachel Kim. I asked if she had been charged. The case was closed without charges. Insufficient evidence. The victim had not preserved documentation in time. The digital trail had been partially wiped. Then Agent Qley told me something I haven't shared with anyone yet. Something that made me sit in my car in the parking garage outside the FBI field office for 20 minutes without moving. The investigation would take several months, but they told me they were confident in what they had. Final update: Agent Qley told me what she couldn't put in the official paperwork yet. The FBI had been building a profile on Daniel Hartwell for 4 years. After Seattle, they kept a watch on his activity. About 3 years ago, they noticed a pattern. He had started appearing at charity events and nonprofit boards in Boston, places where people with trust funds and inherited wealth tended to gather. They had a theory but no confirmed target, until I walked in with a forged credit application, a recorded confession, and a phone full of banking spyware. The thing she told me that made me sit in that garage for 20 minutes was this. They had documentation showing Victoria had been researching me for 6 months before we ever met at the Harvard Club Gala. Financial history, family background, public records tied to my grandfather's estate. My grandfather had set up a trust fund before he died, just under $2 million. The terms were specific. The full amount would be released when I entered a legally recognized marriage. Not a secret, but not public either. It existed in estate documents filed in Massachusetts probate court. Public record. An account linked to a shell company tied to Daniel Hartwell had queried my grandfather's estate filing 14 months before the gala. They found the trust. They found the trigger. Then they built a 3-year plan around it. The coffee shop where Victoria and I had our second conversation, the one that felt spontaneous, was 3 blocks from her apartment. She had been in that neighborhood regularly because I worked nearby. I sat in that garage and tried to count how many moments from 3 years I now had to reframe. Every first, every trip, the proposal at Cape Cod. Sophie told me later that Victoria had practiced crying before the Cape Cod trip. Sophie walked in on her doing it in front of a mirror. Victoria said she was rehearsing an emotional scene for a client event she was planning. Sophie believed her. I believed a lot of things. 4 months after the wedding that did not happen, FBI agents arrested Victoria at her Beacon Hill apartment and Daniel Hartwell at his Back Bay office. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. I was at work when Ryan texted me. They got them. I read it twice. Then I went back to my spreadsheet. The trial took 8 months. I testified. The man from Seattle, Marcus Webb, testified as well. He was 41, had lost $280,000 and 4 years of his life to the same scheme. We didn't speak during the trial. But on the last day, outside the courthouse on New Sudbury Street, he found me on the steps and shook my hand. He said, "You saved me from having to wonder if it was just me." I told him it was never just him. Victoria received 5 years in federal prison. Daniel Hartwell received 7. The court ordered full restitution on the $85,000 credit line. My grandfather's trust was never touched. The marriage never happened. The trigger was never pulled. I moved to Portland, Oregon 2 months after sentencing. I had wanted to move there for years. Victoria had always redirected the conversation whenever I brought it up. I understand now why she needed me to stay in Boston, near the probate filings, near the financial infrastructure she had spent 3 years carefully mapping. Portland was the right call. Senior portfolio manager at a smaller firm on the west side. Different pace. I needed it. Sophie and I stayed in touch. She was the only person from that chapter I kept. She had stood in a bridal suite and made the hardest call of her life for someone she barely knew. That will always matter. She introduced me to Claire about 6 months after I moved. Claire is a pediatrician. She had heard none of the story. We had 3 normal dinners before I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You froze the account before the ceremony." That is the most Alexander thing I have ever heard. I laughed. A real one. I hadn't done that in a long time. People ask what I took away from all of it. They expect something about trust or love, or how you can never really know another person. What I took away is simpler. The data was always there. The transfers, the app, the calendar gaps. The way she changed the subject whenever I mentioned moving cities. I had access to all of it. I just wasn't running the analysis because I had already decided the conclusion. That is the most expensive mistake an analyst can make. You do not decide the outcome before you look at the numbers. You look at the numbers first. Then you decide, it cost me 3 years and a Saturday morning in a church, but I did not lose the trust fund, or the self-respect I walked out of St. Paul's with. Some positions are worth holding. I am doing fine.